What is up, guys? It's Dudu Poker here, back for another video. Today we are going to be looking at two hand histories I played and how to play versus the probe turn bet river line as the imposition preflop raiser in a single raise pot. So I have MDA, we have GTO Wizard, and we have the hand histories. So let's get into the hand. In this hand, I have King of Clubs, Knight of Hearts, and I'm on the button. Folds to me on the button, and I RFI 2.4x, and my opponent, who is a reg, calls in the big blind. The flop comes Ace of Diamonds, King of Diamonds, Five of Diamonds. Let's follow along in GTO Wizard and see how Theory's playing the spot. So, Ace of Diamonds, King of Diamonds, Five of Diamonds. Now you see here that there is a small donking range. And what do we know about donking ranges? If there is a donking range from the out of position preflop caller, then the in position preflop raiser has a low frequency c-bet range because the board is better for out of position. So what we see here is if big blind checks, button only c-bets 30% of the time and checks 70% of the time. And we look at our exact holding of King of Clubs, Nine of Hearts, and it's almost always checking. So that's what we do. And we take a turn. Four of Clubs on the turn, and we're going to follow along in the actual hand. Check, check on the flop. Four of Clubs on the turn, and my opponent, who's a reg, probes turn. Now, what do we know about turn probes? Let's look at MDA for turn probes. We know in turn probes that GTO is between 30 and 40%, but players are overdoing it or on the high side of GTO. So they're not going to be balanced in this node. So let's look at his sizing. His sizing is 169 into 130. So if I do 169 divided by 130, I see he's probing 130% pot. So in theory, does he get to overbet turn? Well, once the flop goes check, check, and the turn's a four of clubs, we see that Theory does overbet probe at some frequency. So we don't have 130, but let's say he goes 125%, and I have my king nine off. What should I do? Well, in theory, it's mostly folding with our exact holding, only calling 8.8% of the time. But we know two things. We know that they overprobe, and we also know how they play rivers. So we should always be calling here in this spot. So that's what we do. Now, on the river, a two of spades comes, and this is where it gets interesting. So let's see what he probes on the river. The turn, he went 130. On the river, he goes 908 into 468. So what is that? 908 divided by 468. And we see he's betting 194% pot. So now we have a real decision. We don't really have much of a hand. We have second pair on a 4 to straight and a monotone board. So we have to be very confident in our read to make a call. Let's see what Theory does. The river is a two of spades, and we know our opponent bet 194% pot. Now Theory goes around 150 and 3x pot and jam, so let's say he went 150. Let's see what King of Clubs, Nine of Hearts is doing to a 150 bet. It's always folding. Okay, so let's see how big of a mistake it is to call. We see it's over a one big blind mistake to call, but we have to think about MDA because players do not play like Theory. So let's look at check, bet, bet for the button versus big blind from the big blind's perspective. If we look at MDA for this spot, we see the field as the single raise pot at a position pre-flop caller. What do we notice? We see bet 120. He went 130 in game, but 120 is pretty close. And then 150 is massively overbluffed. over a 200 hand sample, it's 54 week. It's supposed to be 38 week. Now, he went 194% pot, but we don't have that data. But we can extrapolate. Let's go back to the original hand. We see here, once he bets that big, he can't really have a set because a set wouldn't bet that big. I can easily have a 3. I can also have 2 pair. So he's probably not going to be betting a hand like 3x, a set, or 2 pair. So it kind of only leaves flushes. But let's look at the board. The ace of diamonds blocks a lot of flushes. The king of diamonds also blocks a lot of flushes. So he would need to have specifically a low flush or maybe a hand like queen 9 of diamonds, but that's not many combos. We also know from MDA that they overprobe turn, and also when they bet 120 to 130 on the turn and follow it up with another overbet on the river, that it's massively overbluffed. So we have to take all this into account and we have to make the call. Now, it worked out here. He had queen of diamonds, 10 of spades, and we scooped the pot. So let's look at another spot where we are in the exact same spot, but in different positions. In the second hand, I have ace 9 of spades. I am in the cutoff, and I RFI, and my opponent, who's in the big blind and is likely a reg, calls. Now the flop comes jack of hearts, 6 of spades, 4 of diamonds. So here we'll follow along, jack of hearts, 6 of spades, 4 of diamonds. Now ace 9 of spades that I have never bets flop, so we should always be checking. So we check back. Now on the turn, a 3 of hearts comes, and my opponent decides to probe. But he uses half pot sizing. Let's see if that's a thing in theory. It is. So he goes half pot, and I have a decision with my ace 9. Now, in theory, ace 9 of spades always folds. But it says it's a 2/10 of a big blind mistake. But we have to think about how to play rivers. What do we know about rivers? We know from MDA, let's look at cutoff versus big blind MDA. We know when they probe turn, bet 50, that all sizings are overbluffed. So we're allowed to call turns lighter than theory because we know how to play rivers. So I call in the turn, and a 2 of diamonds comes. Now, the 4 to straight is not a great data point, but we have to look at MDA filters. What do we learn from MDA filters? We learn this is button versus big blind, but we can carry it over. So here, button versus big blind's 35 weak. But what do you see from the 4 to straight? The 4 to straight 1 gap is only 34 weak, so it's almost the same as the aggregate. Now the no gap is much, much stronger. It's only 26 weak, which means it's less bluffs and more value. So in the hand, if this was a jack 6 5-4-3 board compared to a jack 6 4-3-2 board, that would be a no gap versus a 1 gap. So the 1 gap is a weaker run out. That means he has more bluffs. We also know the probe 50 on the turn and any bet on the river is over bluffed. So when my opponent bets 250 into 220, which is 250 divided by 220, we see he's betting 113%. But this data point is not bad. And we also know at 120%, it's 48 weak and it should be 35 weak. So we take this all into consideration and we make the call, and he ends up having 8-7 off, and we scoop the pot with ace high. So this is 2 hand histories that illustrate how to play versus a turn probe in a bet river line. Once you understand the population leaks and how they overprobe on the turn too much, you get to call down on the river much lighter than theory. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Please subscribe. New video every single day, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.